best science fiction is a mirror. It allows us to take a look at ourselves and our current circumstances, politics, society, but putting it into a science fiction context. You know, I grew up in the early 1970s when we were still going to the moon, and I caught the tail end of the Apollo program. Seeing that Saturn V rocket on the pad and all the vapors coming off of it, it was almost like a religious experience, man, watching that as a child. Then eventually, you know, seeing it take off, and then the astronauts 3 days later arriving at the moon, and then landing this super cool lunar module, and then driving around a rover and bouncing around. It's almost sad to me that kids these days don't have something like that. I don't think people can even relate to what that was like back then, how inspirational it was. I would go check out all the books on NASA, and I would look at not only the missions that were currently happening, but also their projected missions into the future. And so they would talk about plans for the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. And I would see things like moon bases and space stations and visits to Mars and so forth. And it was like, I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna be part of that. But then for some reason, once we stopped going to the moon, I noticed interest waning. I watched my friends lose interest. And then Star Wars came out, and that really captured their attention. It's almost like the real space thing was replaced with the space fantasy of Star Wars, you know. And I got it. I understood. It was visually stunning. We'd never seen anything like it. I watched that film, and it motivated me in a different direction. While my friends were playing with the action figures, I wanted to understand the filmmaking process. I wanted to understand, how did they make the film? How did they create the technology to capture the visuals on those planets and spaceships and locations? It seemed believable. In addition to seeing Star Wars, you know, seeing 2001 as a child was another transcendent experience for me. You know, the realism of that film, the design work. I mean, here we are over 50 years later, and it still looks like it was made now. It was incredible from an aesthetic standpoint. And I thought, maybe what I can do is grow up and use the technology from Star Wars to tell the stories about the kind of future that I thought I was going to grow up to experience. I went to college for cinematography. After college, I knew I wanted to start my own business because I felt like having my own production company would be the best way to get this thing going. And so I began directing music videos, commercials, documentaries, did a lot of corporate projects. I worked for clients like Delta and Musicland Group, people like that. And then eventually I had NASA as a major client. I was trying to figure out how to popularize science, like Carl Sagan, who was a huge hero of mine, probably my greatest hero. Carl was all about popularizing science. FutureDude was a blog that I had that followed my journeys through all these different worlds I've talked about. I mean, I was working in film, I was working with science, I was working with entrepreneurship, all these things. And I realized that more than anything, the work I was doing was about the future. It wasn't just about space. I mean, I'm interested in a lot of different things. You know, as a kid, I was interested in oceanography, I was interested in meteorology. Those are also other topics that I really took seriously. And I wanted to tell stories in all those realms. So the FutureDude brand, it did really well, and I had a lot of people interested in to talk about it. And I thought, you know, why don't I just rename my company after the blog? If you look at a movie like Apollo 13, which again is a docudrama, it's not science fiction, but I wanted to tell stories that were similar to that, but set in the future. So you get the science right, you get the physics right. I have something that I call the 85% rule, which is any story that we tell, we're trying to get the science and technology 85% accurate. And then we leave 15% just for cool sake, you know, because it's not a documentary, it is a movie, you know, and audiences want to see cool things. Our stories are what they call hard sci-fi, in that we are trying to get the science and technology and the engineering right, while also telling these dynamic, character-driven stories about people that you care about and that people that you want to follow. You have to have people that you're with who you can relate to, who you can see aspects of yourself, or I think very importantly, learn something about a person's journey that has nothing to do with yours, right? To go, hey, this has nothing to do with my life, but I watched this person go, my gosh, that's what it's like for them. That's what it would be like if I were them. I start the process of designing a film when I'm developing the story. So the two happen hand in hand. I don't want to write anything that we can't make. And I target a budget from the beginning. And I say, okay, so this is what my budget is. How can we design the film from a look and feel standpoint? How do we tell the story? How do these all go together so we can hit our target? So that's kind of the first place is as I'm crafting the script, the story, the characters, I'm also developing the production design. To me, what we're doing is freeing ourselves because we're fixing it in pre. Any problems that we may have, we can start to iron them out early, so that by the time we get to the set, we know exactly what we want to do. We know exactly how it's going to work. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't room for spontaneity and that there isn't room for creativity. That's very much important to me. I try to surround myself with creatives who I value their input and I value their creative capabilities. I think that gives us a grounding that frees us to be more creative in a way, right? What I believe we're doing is bringing science fiction back to its actual roots. There was a time when sci-fi was about ideas, yet we want to do it in such a way that we take audiences on amazing journeys with characters they're going to care about, with characters they want to go on adventures with. And I just can't wait for everyone to see what we have in store for them.